Beyond the Clef is presented by Director's Choice.
We're here at SMSE 2018 Beyond the Clef, and I'm here with Joshua Brown. Thanks for being on the program.
Yeah, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, and so Josh, you are the conducting DMA, you are a conducting DMA, at the University of North Texas School of Music in choir, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Choir, okay, choral studies.
Choral studies.
Is that the better way to say it?
I suppose it's the same difference.
So we were talking a little bit about your going into a program, and say I'm going into a program and maybe it's a fixer-upper, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's say this is the choir version of HGTV.
Yeah.
And I'm going to the program and it had some issues before, struggling musically, struggling with the previous director, struggling maybe size-wise and whatnot. What can I do to go into that program and start it off right?
Well, I sort of thought through this because I've been I went in as a head director of two different programs and had to sort of get things put back on track when I started.
High school or middle school?
High school.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So when I did that, there were several things I figured out I needed to do, and so I sort of organized them into different steps. The first one I put was to focus on building relationships, which I think is really the most important, because over my time teaching, I benefited from those relationships and getting to know people and them getting to know me and building my credibility as a leader of a program.
And that's such a common theme that we've had over all the interviews I've done so far. I'd say almost everyone has said building relationships. That seems like a cornerstone of what we do in music.
Yeah. Well, the kids obviously don't want to perform for someone they don't care about as much or feels like they care about them. So it's really important to build that.
And I'm sure going into that program, building that relationship might be breaking down some trust barriers that have happened from maybe previous situations.
Yeah, as one of my teachers at UNT says, it's not always your fault, but it is your problem.
Yeah,
so
that's a good way to put it.
Being aware of some of the baggage of the past and trying to figure out how you can build credibility and really rebuild and establish relationships in places where it may have been lacking can really benefit and build momentum that you need moving forward in a program. And I think it takes a lot of time. That's not one of those things you can just do real fast or Google and find it on the internet and replicate, like so many of the other things we can do. And so you have to put in the time to do that. And sometimes you have to make that a priority over other things and make a purposeful decision of maybe we don't do 5 festivals in the spring, but we do 2 my first year or 1, and then later on you can build toward other things.
Right. So tempering the size expectations and what you're doing to make sure your priorities are there. Okay.
Yeah. And I think part of it too is to find out what your kids are passionate about. If you know what they care about, then you can use that to help motivate them. And so if you take the time to really get to know them, that can be really beneficial. But I also mean partially like the other humans in the school building. I know the band director colleagues I have had over the years, I was thinking back and their thoughts and wisdom and their help has been tremendous in helping me better serve my students. And so I would have never had that if I didn't take a little bit of time when I could to go just sit in the band hall and say, hey, look, this is a problem I'm dealing with. What would you do? And then it just gives you even more credibility when you're ultimately sitting in an administrator's room saying, this is the decision we need to make. And I've already ran it by some of my colleagues in the building who've done similar things in the past. So, there's a million ways that can benefit you. Then one of the other things I thought about, and this was a great bit of wisdom that was given to me right as I started in Coppell by one of my friends, and he said to me, pick your 5 things in your first year. This is the second step I wrote down, which is make good choices. So he said, choose 5 things. Don't try to change everything that's wrong. When you go into a new program, there's ultimately going to be probably 50 or more things that you go, gosh, that shouldn't be that way.
Well, and even if you're going to a program that was successful, in our district, a good friend of mine, June Bearden, who I'm going to have on later on today, she had a very successful program for 20 years. And as somebody new coming into that program, it's going to be different. And so change, you're suggesting maybe just pick 5 things. Don't try to rock the whole boat.
I found myself my first year at Coppell making a list of all the things I wanted to change over time that I felt like were major priorities, and then ranking them. and going, what am I going to get the
That's a
most
great idea.
bang for the buck if I make this change? One of them that was a big first change was a change in the schedule, which was a huge change. I had to build, I had to build confidence in the parents, the administrators, and make sure I have the support of the administrators before I go and make a big change like that. And so that was a big thing, but ultimately, all of that communication and all of that planning helped me make other changes more quickly because everyone saw that it was the right change after it happened. So, the other piece of that, I think, which is so important, is to have an effective communication plan. When you do make one of those 5 changes, if you can take the time to explain why this is going to be in the best interest of the kids. And I found over the years, if I can explain things to administrators and parents, even if it's going to be something they don't like they're going to need to eat their broccoli, musically speaking, then,
What is the musical equivalent of eating their broccoli?
Well, for me, one of them was, we're going to sight read every day.
There you go, okay.
And my
That's a
kids
good one.
initially were like, I'm not so into that. And I was like, that's all right.
Yeah.
Because when we get to the end of the year and you have pride in what you have accomplished, and we build on that, like they bought in by the end of it. But I think if you can frame things in such a way of, I'm not changing this because I want it this way, although you might, but I'm changing it ultimately because it's best for kids. And if you can frame it that way, usually you can get just about anybody on your side. So then the third step I wrote down was take time to reflect on leadership, because there's going to be a lot of times where I remember being so busy as a teacher, there's always more stuff to do. And if you can find ways to not let the busyness crowd out what is important and urgent, that takes time to really reflect on that. And so part of it, I think, too, is that I found myself doing it when I would think about my program and think about what the next steps were, was to think about what I want the program to ultimately be, ideally. And so if in 10 years or 5 years I'm still the leader of this program, what should it look like ideally? And then each one of those steps that you prioritize to make changes fit into an ultimate plan that go toward, that ideal setup that you're moving toward. And that takes time to reflect. Otherwise, there'd be times I'd find myself just making sort of arbitrary little changes or, little bitty decisions that sometimes slowed down things. So, and then, another piece of that, which I found when I think about things, is you can build systems into your program that allow you to not be so bombarded by the busyness to where you can be the leader thinking about what's really important. One of the small things that I did that I found to be enormously helpful at Capel was we created a Google form where every time a kid needed to communicate an absence or a conflict, the kids would come up in the passing period when I'm trying to figure out, okay, do I have everything I need to teach this class that I've planned?
Right.
And oh, by the way, the administrators are coming in to do a walkthrough. And
Right.
oh, by the way, so I was trying to do all that, and then I'd have 10 kids come to me and go, oh, I can't be at this. I'm going to be late to this or whatever. And then, or worse yet, they'd come to me after and they'd say, but I told so-and-so your assistant. And then I go to my assistant and I'd be like, they never said that. So,
I always think they play mom and dad on that one.
yeah, so when I put that system in place to where there was a sign on the wall that says, go put this in on your phone, and I will reply back to you and say you're approved to miss for this or you're not, that helps me. I could sit down at one time and deal with those conflicts in writing in a way that any parent could see. It was time stamped. So systems like that help to make it where the just day-to-day junk can be sort of moved out of the way to where you can focus on the bigger picture items, which I think is so important.
Right.
And then sort of my last couple things to think about is that no matter where you are with your program, you have to try to take time to take care of yourself, And I'm the chief person that can talk about why messing that up is a problem. There were tons of times where, work never stopped, it seemed like. But you've got to purposely put in vacation time and purposely give yourself time to recharge, because your kids deserve the best version of you in the classroom and outside the classroom. And there's a lot of times I feel like every educator goes in, you go, you know what, I'm just so not my best self today, but they need to see the best version of you, and they deserve that. So
I was talking to a friend this summer about that particular thing, and he was like, man, I was up at the band hall every day until 7 or 8, and I was just constant. I just wanted to work more. And he said what he did was that he had a hard limit, and so like if he got out at 3:45, he said, I'm going to go home today and tomorrow at 5:30. No matter what I'm going to do, I'm going to drop it, and I'm going to stop, and I'm going to walk away.
Yeah.
And what he found was that made him work a little more efficient, a little quicker.
Yep.
And then the next day, it wasn't really that bad that he left that. And he just dropped it right then and walked away and went home. And he felt more refreshed and all that, because he gets to go home and play the Switch.
Yeah. I
or
think
do whatever he does to relax.
I had an assistant, I think, one of my 3rd and 4th year at Capel, who helped me figure that out. Because it was a priority to him. And so when it became a priority to him, I started to figure out the benefit of like, hey, I can get more stuff done during the day if I use the time effectively. And then, I'm more energized. I'm more excited about what's going on. And so ultimately the kids are better served.
Right. And I'm sure our wives appreciate it more. And, she's over there watching you right now, elementary teacher in music as well. The Unsung Heroes, which is the theme for this morning, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I have a couple questions here for you and how that relates to kind of what you talked about. Mm-hmm. So let's say you were an assistant director in a situation where you're going into a program that's not quite doing what you need to do. A lot of our viewers are years 1 to 10 teachers. Yeah. Say they're an assistant and they're at a program that's not doing that great. How do they kind of do this? This might be a trick question for you in this situation. How do they try to work from the ground up?
Well, I think part of it is, and I think back to a bit of an advice that one of my administrators gave me one time, which is you should work really hard to innovate within your sandbox, which is to say there's always some level of control that we have as educators regardless of our position. And so even if you're an assistant director, you have the ability to communicate with your colleague about certain issues like this that could help you. You also are in control theoretically of your classes. And so if you are, then you can make those decisions as far as choosing your repertoire far enough in advance and choosing the right repertoire. You can make decisions that help you be more effectively regardless of your position, I think. You just have to reflect on those things, think about the personalities involved and how you can respect your colleague as a head director. Sometimes, like I had an assistant one time that was, my senior in age and was equally educated. And I learned a lot from working with her. And so if you have the right person, even if you don't, you still can innovate within your sandbox.
I had my first assistant as a head director. I came in and Jeff Bissett was his name, and he's actually passed, but he was, I think, 68 years old when I got there, and he had taught longer than I'd been alive at that point. And we were great friends, but there were a couple moments when he might, well, we've been doing this as I've been touching, we had those moments, but in the end, we had a great relationship where we could always come back together and say, hey, in the end, this is what I feel really passionate about. This is what you feel really passionate about. Let's try to meet in the middle here, try to work on that, and then move forward on there.
Yeah.
Well, what you were talking about going into a program that, you've gone into some that might have had some changes as a high school director. How did that work with your middle school directors and your feeders into that program?
That's a great question. One of my middle school feeder directors, when I went to Capel, I had 3 different feeders. When I was in Abilene, I had 2. So all of a sudden, I thought that was going to be great. Like when I was sitting in Abilene, I was like, I'm going to have 3 feeders. How great is that going to be? And it was in a lot of ways. But what wasn't great is the fact that then I have to go to another place.
Right.
I have to build more relationships in another building. And that's a challenge.
It's amazing how that third building really does, because when I first got on, I opened up my school, a middle school, and the district had operated with 2 middle schools. And staff-wise, and it's just easy to be equal and here and here and here. That third one is hard. I don't know what it is, but that it just exponentially makes all the workload go up with the third.
So it was so funny because when I sat down and met with my middle school colleagues when I first got to Capel, And I said, well, when I come to visit your class, feel free to stick me at the piano. I can play parts for you. Or you can say, hey, go work with these kids on their region music. I don't really care. Just put me to work. And one of the middle school directors looked right at me, didn't miss a beat, and said, well, we'll believe that when we see you in our room. Right? So I think it's really important, part of the key of building that relationship from the top down is to actually do what you say you're going to do and make that a big priority. But for those,
I always like to try to prioritize, no matter what I'm doing, being in the room and teaching kids is the highest priority. If that's going to happen, that's what I need to do.
Yeah.
And there's been those days, and my assistant knows, there's the region band we're hosting and it's coming up, and I got to make sure this is taken care of, and I got to go do the meal order here and that. Yeah. Sometimes those things come up as long as you plan, but you got to make sure that the biggest priority is being in the room with the kids.
Well, and with my middle school directors going there, I was always in awe because they're having to do all the things I had to do and teach, and they don't have an assistant. So I learned a lot from my colleagues who were already there because they knew who you went to do all these different things. And a lot of times, because of the amount of work they have to do, they know the most efficient way to do something.
Right.
So the smart high school director can learn an awful lot by just going and observing what's going on in those classrooms and seeing how they get the work done.
That's a good little gem there.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good gem to end on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the program. I've learned so much from you, and it's been fantastic. We'll have to get you on the show again.
Yeah, it'll be great. Yeah, I'd love to.
All right. Joshua Brown, a DMA right now at UNT, and thank you for joining us at Beyond the Clef.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Clef. For more great content, subscribe on our website at beyondtheclef.com, and be sure to follow us on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, and Facebook.